The Burden of Family, a tale of Amarachi. Still remember the day the news came. No one could have expected it. Amarachi, a bright and lively girl, once full of dreams and joy, had become a shadow of her former self. Her story is one that I hold dear, a story of pain, resilience, and transformation. A tale that unfolded right before my eyes in the quiet village of Ihuoma, nestled between hills so green they almost seemed endless. Amarachi's life before tragedy had been one of warmth and love. She had been the apple of her parents' eyes, always laughing, always playing with the other children in the village, surrounded by the vibrant songs of the elders and the smells of freshly cooked food drifting through the air. Her parents were well respected in the community, and their home was always open to visitors, full of life and warmth. But that was before the accident. It happened one cold evening when the air smelled of rain and the ground was slick. Amarachi's parents had been traveling to the nearby town, bringing goods to sell, when their vehicle slid off the muddy road. Neither survived. Suddenly, Amarachi, who had once been surrounded by love, found herself alone in the world. With no relatives nearby, it was only her father's older brother, Ikenna, who took her in. Ikenna, a man hardened by life struggles and disappointments, didn't have the patience or the kindness that Amarachi needed. He had a family of his own, his wife, Adesi, and their daughter, Omara, who was the same age as Amarachi, though you wouldn't have guessed that from the way Omara acted. From the first moment Amarachi arrived, she understood that things would not be easy. Ikenna, though he tried to appear kind, made it clear that he saw her as a burden. His house became colder with every passing day, and the walls, once filled with love, now seemed to echo with resentment. Adesi, his wife, treated Amarachi even worse. She saw her as nothing more than an extra mouth to feed, a servant in the household. If there was any food left, Amarachi would get it last, often finding only scraps of rice or dried beans. Omara, on the other hand, was spoiled, receiving new clothes, fresh meals, and the undivided attention of her parents. It was as if Amarachi had never been a part of their family. She was sent on endless chores, always the last to be spoken to and the first to be blamed. Omara would snap her fingers and Amarachi would be expected to rush. If Omara's shoes were misplaced, it was Amarachi who would have to find them, even when she was tired, even when her back ached from the heavy lifting. Amarachi never had a choice but to obey. If she dared to question it, Ikenna's sharp words would remind her, "You're not a child anymore. You're here to help." But as bad as things were, Amarachi endured. She had nowhere else to go. She reminded herself that at least she wasn't homeless. At least she had a roof over her head. There was comfort, however small, in that. The pain in her heart was real, but it wasn't enough to break her. She endured because what other choice did she have? Everything changed though when Ikenna's debts finally came due. Ikenna had borrowed money from Olumide, a wealthy businessman who was known for being ruthless. Olumide was the type of man that everyone feared in our village. If you owed him money, you didn't dare delay in paying it back, or else well, bad things would happen. Ikenna, desperate to keep his failing business afloat, had borrowed money from Olumide, promising to repay it in a few months. But months passed, and Ikenna had paid nothing. One evening, Olumide arrived in the village. It wasn't just him, it was his bodyguards, armed and fierce, their faces shadowed by the tall trees of the compound. They were known to make their presence known. Ikenna, Olumide's voice was calm, but his words struck fear. You have failed to repay me. Ikenna, who was always so proud, now found himself on his knees, pleading for more time. Just a little more time, please, he begged, shaking with fear. Olumide shook his head, his eyes cold. Failure is not something I tolerate, and that's when the decision was made. In his desperation, Ikenna looked to his wife, Adesi, and to his daughter, Omara, before turning to the one person who had no choice. Amarachi, take Amarachi, Ikenna said, his voice trembling. She is strong. She will work for you. She will pay off my debt. Amarachi's heart stopped. She looked up at Ikenna, her only remaining family, her eyes full of disbelief. She had expected many things, but not this. Olumide's eyes narrowed as he turned his gaze to Amarachi. He studied her for a moment, and then a cruel smile formed on his lips. Fine, he said, and just like that, Amarachi was taken. No one looked back as she was dragged away from the only family she had left. She had no say in the matter. As the guards led her to Olumide's sleek black car, she turned one last time, hoping for a glimmer of mercy. But the door slammed shut, and that was the end of her old life. When they arrived at Olumide's mansion, Amarachi was overwhelmed. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, grand and lavish, with marble floors and gold chandeliers that sparkled under the cold light. But despite the wealth and luxury, there was no warmth here, just cold, calculated power. You belong to me now, Olumide said, his voice low and commanding. You will do as I say, or you will suffer. Amarachi didn't have the strength to argue. She had no choice but to comply. But she kept something inside her. Hope. She had to survive this. She would survive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Amarachi proved herself to be the hardest worker in the mansion. She cooked, cleaned, and ran errands. But her greatest skill was in the kitchen. One day, the household cook fell ill and the kitchen was thrown into chaos. Without thinking, Amarachi stepped in. She prepared the meal, and when Olumide tasted it, he was struck by the flavor. He ordered that she be the one to prepare all of his meals from that day on. She was no longer just a maid, she had a place of importance. And as time passed, their relationship began to change. They talked more, and he began to notice something about her: her quiet strength, her intelligence, her dignity. Then came the day when Olumide, in a rare moment of vulnerability, asked her about her past. Amarachi, with a soft voice, told him everything. She spoke of how her uncle had abandoned her and given her away like an object. Olumide, for the first time, felt something he had never felt before: guilt. He had thought he was punishing Ikenna, but now he saw the truth. And as the days passed, he began to see Amarachi not just as someone to serve him, but as someone worthy of his respect. One evening, Olumide looked at her and said, "You are not a prisoner. You are free to leave whenever you wish." Amarachi, stunned by the words, found herself at a crossroads. She had spent so long in survival mode that she didn't know how to live any other way. But this was a moment of choice. She could leave or she could stay. And that night, after a long silence, Olumide admitted something that shocked Amarachi to her core. He had feelings for her. "I don't want you to be with anyone else," he confessed. And that was the beginning of something new. A relationship was born out of respect, understanding, and change. Months later, Olumide, now a changed man, went to see Ikenna to ask for his blessing. Ikenna was furious, but in the end, he relented, though he was clearly not pleased. "Take her, then," he spat. "She's yours." And so Amarachi and Olumide were married. But more than that, Amarachi had reclaimed her life. From the ashes of betrayal, she had risen. She was no longer a servant, no longer the burden she had once been made to feel. She was loved. As for Akina and Adesi, they never again crossed paths with Amarachi. Their lives became harder, and they realized too late what they had lost. Amarachi, who had once been discarded, was now the woman with the power and love they could never have. And so, Amarachi and Olumide lived happily ever after, proving that resilience, love, and kindness will always triumph over cruelty.